Remember when Remington Steele seemed like just another glossy detective show? All tuxedos, clever banter, and a handsome leading man solving crimes with an easy smile? For 5 seasons, audiences watched Laura Holt and the debonair con man, calling himself Remington Steele, trade one-liners between cases. And on the surface it looked like a simple, stylish romp through 80s network television, the kind of show you left on in the background on a Tuesday night. But behind the scenes, the real story was a lot messier, and honestly a lot stranger than anything that ever actually made it to air. Today we are counting down 15 surprising facts about Remington Steele, the show that quietly launched one of the most famous careers in movie history, while hiding a genuine mountain of drama just off camera the entire time. Drama that ranged from casting room standoffs to a real-life James Bond near miss. We are talking about a leading man who almost lost his shot at playing James Bond because of this very series, not once but twice. A secret identity that even the writers themselves refused to fully solve, and a real-life father and daughter reunion that unfolded right in front of the cameras. We are also talking about a cast that reportedly could barely stand to speak to one another between takes, a real-life family reunion that echoed the show's own storylines in the eeriest way possible, and a comeback season that almost nobody actually wanted in the first place. And trust us, you are not ready for what is waiting near the very top of this list. Because underneath all that 80s gloss, this show quietly became one of the strangest, most tangled behind-the-scenes stories of the entire decade. So, hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and let us know in the comments if you remember watching this one when it first aired. Now, let us get into the countdown with number 15. Number 15, an idea that was born more than a decade too early. Long before Stephanie Zimbalist or Pierce Brosnan ever set foot on a soundstage, television director Robert Butler was already pitching a very different kind of detective show. Back in 1969, Butler dreamed up a series built around a solo, female private investigator, a genuinely bold concept for network television at that particular moment in history, especially with almost no precedent beyond a brief flirtation with the idea on the spy spin-off, The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. He brought the idea to producer Grant Tinker, who liked the premise well enough, but worried that mainstream audiences simply were not ready for a woman carrying an entire detective show on her own. The pitch was shelved almost immediately, and Butler moved on to plenty of other high-profile projects, including memorable directing work on both Batman and the original Star Trek. But here is where it gets interesting. Butler never fully let go of the idea, and more than a decade later, as the television landscape shifted and working women became central characters in several hit sitcoms of the era, he revived the old concept together with Tinker, who was now running MTM Enterprises as its head. What had once been dismissed as too far ahead of its time suddenly felt exactly right for 1982. NBC even asked for an unusual premise pilot, one that imagined the agency already up and running 6 months into its fictional existence, before eventually agreeing to the origin story audiences actually saw first. So, yeah, sometimes a genuinely great idea just needs the rest of the television industry a full decade or more to finally catch up. Number 14. The name came from a typewriter and a football team. Ever wonder how Laura Holt landed on such a perfectly polished, powerful-sounding name for her entirely fictional boss? Turns out the inspiration was delightfully unglamorous. According to the character's own backstory within the show, Laura combined two completely unrelated things sitting right in front of her at the time: an old Remington typewriter parked on her desk, and her personal devotion to the Pittsburgh Steelers football team back home. Mash those two things together, and suddenly you have got a name that sounds like it belongs on a brass office plaque downtown. Exactly the kind of gravitas a struggling agency desperately needed. At the time, Laura simply needed something that projected authority and confidence. A name that would finally make skeptical clients stop demanding to speak with the man supposedly in charge of the business. But here's where it gets a little ironic. The invented name worked so well that it eventually eclipsed her own entirely, with clients, criminals, and eventually an actual wandering con man, all treating Remington Steele as the real star of the agency, rather than the sharp, capable woman who built the whole thing from nothing. And what makes it even stranger is that Laura herself almost never called him by his invented first name at all. sticking stubbornly to the far more formal Mr. Steele for practically the entire run of the series. Even the very first broadcast episode leaned directly into the joke, titled License to Steal, a wink at exactly how the whole charade came together in the first place, and business at the agency reportedly picked up almost overnight once the fictional boss started fielding phone calls. Number 13, the leading lady almost said no to the whole project before it even began. Stephanie Zimbalist was already an established television actress with a solid resume full of respected television movies when producers first came calling about Remington Steele. At the time, she was not exactly eager to sign on for another lengthy project of any kind. Committing to a weekly network series meant locking herself into a single character for years on end, and she genuinely worried it would limit the range of roles she could pursue afterward, a common fear among serious young actors of that era. So Zimbalist initially turned the offer down flat, with almost no hesitation whatsoever on her part. But here is where things get interesting. According to accounts from the production, she experienced a late-night change of heart, reconsidering the opportunity after her initial rejection and ultimately deciding to take the leap into series television after all. That last-minute reversal ended up defining her entire career for the next 5 years, and gave the series its steady, grounded emotional center throughout every twist, turn, and cast shakeup along the way. And what makes it even funnier looking back is that the very actress who almost walked away from Laura Holt became the one performer who was there for absolutely every single episode of the entire run, through cast changes, network drama, and everything else in between. A magazine profile published not long after the premiere even captured her early exhaustion with the schedule, describing brutal 5:30 in the morning call times that left her privately questioning whether she had made the right decision after all. Number 12, the network almost said no to its own future leading man as well. Before Pierce Brosnan became a household name, he was best known for a supporting role in the miniseries The Manions of America, and NBC executives were not immediately convinced he could carry an entire weekly series on his own shoulders. During the audition process, network brass raised real concerns that Brosnan was simply too much of an unknown quantity for American audiences at the time, worried that his relative obscurity stateside would hurt the show's overall chances of success right out of the gate. It sounds harmless enough as ordinary studio hesitation goes, but it very nearly cost Brosnan the exact role that would go on to define his entire early career in Hollywood. Here is where it gets interesting. MTM executive Stu Irwin flatly refused to back down, going face-to-face with NBC's famously powerful programming chief, Brandon Tartikoff, to fight for the actor personally and directly on his behalf. Tartikoff eventually relented, and the rest quite literally became television history. And no, that particular meeting was not a small gamble at all. Had it gone even slightly differently, one of the most recognizable leading men of the entire era might never have gotten his real start in American television in the first place, and a certain future spy franchise might look very different today. Ironically, Brosnan had already crossed paths with the world of Bond just a year earlier, since his then-wife Cassandra Harris had co-starred in the Bond film For Your Eyes Only, putting him in the same social circles as producer Albert Broccoli long before anyone imagined he might one day play the spy himself. Number 11, nobody ever learned his real name, not even the show's own writers. One of the strangest running jokes of the entire series is baked directly into its central premise. Pierce Brosnan's character, a former thief and con man who assumes the identity of Remington Steele in the very first episode, never actually reveals his true birth name across the show's entire 5-season run, no matter how many mysteries get solved along the way. Writers eventually explain this deliberate mystery away by revealing that the character had been born illegitimately, meaning there was technically no official record of who he really was to begin with, which conveniently closed the door on ever needing a definitive answer. Sounds like a simple, tidy plot device, right? Not exactly. The mystery became such a defining part of the character's overall appeal that even after 5 full seasons packed with twists, romance, and international intrigue, audiences never actually got a clear answer to the question. Devoted fans debated it endlessly for years afterward, convinced the writers must be sitting on some grand reveal that simply never arrived on screen before the series wrapped. And what makes it even stranger is that the ambiguity was fully intentional from the very start. A deliberate creative choice that let the character remain a walking question mark right up through the emotional series finale itself. It also fit neatly with the character's obsession with old film noir, a genre practically built around amnesiac drifters and men reinventing themselves under new names, which made his own unresolved identity feel less like a loose end and more like a genre tribute in disguise. Number 10. Every single episode title contained the exact same word. If you ever binge-watched Remington Steele from start to finish, you may have noticed a pattern hiding in plain sight the whole time. Every episode across all 5 seasons worked the word Steele into its title somehow, with absolutely no exceptions to the unofficial rule. Some of these titles were clever wordplay built directly around that particular week's plot, like Steele Among the Living or Scene Stealers, while plenty of others leaned into pure, groan-worthy pun territory purely for the fun of it, including favorites like Steele Crazy After All These Years and You're Steele the One for Me. At the time, this quirky naming convention became something of an unofficial signature for the whole show, instantly recognizable to anyone scanning a weekly programming guide in the newspaper. But here is where it gets a little repetitive in hindsight. As the series stretched into its later seasons, writers reportedly found themselves scrambling harder and harder to come up with fresh Steele-based puns that had not already been used somewhere earlier in the run. And somehow, across dozens upon dozens of episodes, they genuinely never once broke the pattern, delivering a Steele-themed pun for literally every single installment across the entire series run, right down to the abbreviated movie-length episodes that closed the show out in 1987. Remarkably, the writers kept the streak alive even under that unusual format, proving the joke had become as much a part of the show's identity as the mystery detective himself, a small, consistent thread of continuity running through nearly 5 years of constant behind-the-scenes upheaval, cast changes, and network drama. Now, we have to pause for just a second because these next few reveals get even wilder. And honestly, this is roughly where the story stops being about a quirky little detective show and starts feeling like something ripped straight out of a soap opera. We are about to get into real family drama, real Hollywood casting near misses, and one of the strangest coincidences in the history of network television. If you are enjoying these behind-the-scenes secrets so far, do us a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and drop a comment telling us exactly which fact has surprised you the most so far in this countdown. We read every single comment, and we genuinely love hearing which of these stories catches people off guard. All right, let us get back into it with number 9. Number 9, a real-life father was cast to play a fictional one. Stephanie Zimbalist's actual father, veteran actor Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., was already quite famous in his own right for playing a suave private investigator named Stu Bailey on the beloved classic series 77 Sunset Strip decades earlier. Years later, he guest starred on his own daughter's show as Daniel Chalmers, a charming and morally slippery character who becomes deeply entangled in the ongoing storyline. Sounds like a fun little bit of stunt casting, right? Not exactly a random coincidence, and definitely not just a throwaway cameo appearance for old time's sake. Here is where it gets genuinely strange. Chalmers is eventually revealed within the show's own storyline to be the biological father of Remington Steele himself, meaning Stephanie Zimbalist's real father ended up playing the fictional father of the very man playing her on-screen romantic interest week after week. That kind of layered, almost uncomfortably meta-family dynamic rarely happens by pure accident in Hollywood casting rooms, and it gave longtime fans of both actors an unexpected little thrill once the connection finally clicked into place on screen. It also created a strange sort of career symmetry between father and daughter, since Ephraim had spent years playing a dashing investigator running his own agency, and here he was decades later, guest starring on his own child's version of practically the very same premise. Even the casting directors reportedly leaned into the resemblance on purpose, framing several of Chalmers' scenes to echo the same easy charm audiences already associated with Ephraim from his own detective days on television, letting longtime viewers enjoy a little wink of recognition even if they never consciously connected the two roles. Number 8. Every single episode was secretly a love letter to old movies. From its earliest days on the air, Remington Steele built a clever recurring formula into nearly every single case the two detectives tackled together. Whenever Steele encountered a genuinely tricky situation, he would lean heavily on his encyclopedic knowledge of classic film to guide his next move, often solving cases by essentially channeling plots he remembered from old movies rather than relying on any actual investigative training whatsoever. The show referenced genuine noir and mystery classics constantly throughout its run, including North by Northwest, Rear Window, Gone with the Wind, Arsenic and Old Lace, Citizen Kane, and even the 1944 film Laura, which happens to share its title with the leading lady herself, a detail sharp-eyed fans loved pointing out. At the time, this approach made the entire series feel like a loving, ongoing tribute to Golden Age Hollywood, wrapped inside a modern television detective format. But here is where it gets even more layered than it first appears. Because Steele solves so many cases by essentially imitating old movie plots, his effectiveness was often more about performance and pure confidence than genuine investigative training, and that underlying tension between style and substance became one of the show's most enduring running jokes across every single season. The production even snuck the tribute into its closing production logo, where the familiar MTM Enterprises mascot, Kitten, briefly appears wearing a Sherlock Holmes deerstalker cap and clutching a meerschaum pipe, a tiny, easy-to-miss nod to the detective genre the whole series was built around. One that dedicated fans still point out to newcomers watching the show for the very first time today. Number 7. The secretary role got a total last-minute makeover before filming even began. When Doris Roberts joined the cast in the second season as Mildred Krebs, the character was almost completely different from what eventually made it to screen. The role was originally envisioned as a possible romantic rival for Remington Steele himself, written specifically for a woman in her mid-30s who would stir up genuine tension inside the small detective agency. Sounds straightforward enough for a network drama, right? Not exactly what actually happened once casting began. Here is where it gets interesting. Doris Roberts came in to read for the part and made such a strong, memorable impression on the producers that the entire character was retooled specifically around her own unique comedic energy on the spot. Mildred became instead a sharp-tongued former Internal Revenue Service agent who had originally been investigating Steele's suspicious tax records before eventually ending up working for him full-time out of the same office. And what makes it even funnier is that this completely reworked character became a genuine fan favorite for years afterward, years before Roberts became a household name, playing another beloved mother figure on Everybody Loves Raymond. Her chemistry with both leads grew so strong that Mildred eventually evolved from comic relief into a trusted full partner at the agency, even getting swept into some of the show's biggest capers herself by the later seasons, occasionally outsmarting both Laura and Steele in the process, much to the delight of longtime viewers who had watched her arrive as a minor plot device and slowly grow into one of the most beloved parts of the entire ensemble. Number 6. The two leads reportedly barely spoke to each other off camera at all. On screen, Laura Holt and Remington Steele practically radiated chemistry, trading flirtatious banter and lingering glances that kept audiences hooked week after week for years on end. Off-camera, according to numerous accounts from people connected to the production, the relationship between Stephanie Zimbalist and Pierce Brosnan was considerably cooler in reality than anything viewers ever saw. Reports from the set describe genuine tension between the two stars, with claims that they would barely interact with one another socially unless the cameras were actually rolling on a scene together at that exact moment. Sounds like it could have easily sunk the entire show, right? Not exactly, and that is honestly the strangest part of this whole story. Whatever friction existed behind the scenes never seemed to bleed into their on-screen performances, which continued to feel effortless and genuinely charged with warmth, episode after episode, season after season. In later years, both actors have spoken more openly about that particular period, admitting the atmosphere had indeed been tense at times, while also expressing real, lasting respect and admiration for one another when looking back on the entire shared experience. Interestingly, the show's own producer Glenn Gordon Caron would go on to create Moonlighting shortly afterward, a series famous for the exact same phenomenon, on-screen sparks paired with genuinely difficult off-screen dynamics between its own two leads, almost as though the pattern followed him from one hit show straight into the next. A strange little coincidence that television historians still bring up whenever the two shows get compared. Number 5, the DVD release accidentally recreated the show's own biggest running joke. When the complete series eventually arrived on home video decades later, the packaging for the very first season quietly echoed one of the show's own long-running gags about who actually deserved top billing on the marquee. Even though Stephanie Zimbalist had held top billing throughout the entire original broadcast run, the distributor's promotional materials and box art for that initial release focused almost entirely on Pierce Brosnan, omitting Zimbalist from the cover art altogether at first. Sounds like a strange oversight for a show literally about a talented woman being professionally overshadowed by a man she personally invented, right? It is exactly that ironic, honestly, almost too perfectly so. Here's where it gets even more amusing. The mistake was eventually noticed and hastily corrected, with a small added sticker acknowledging her involvement. And by the time the second season officially released, Zimbalist finally received proper star billing with her own photograph featured right on the box art. And what makes it even stranger is that the very same first season packaging featured Doris Roberts prominently on the back cover, despite the fact that her character had not even joined the show until the very start of season 2. Later releases tried to correct course further, adding behind-the-scenes featurettes that finally gave Zimbalist proper space to reflect on the role that had defined so much of her career, correcting a marketing decision that longtime fans had noticed and quietly criticized online for years after the initial release first hit store shelves across the country. Number 4, this show nearly cost its leading man a genuine shot at playing James Bond. By the spring of 1986, Remington Steele appeared to be finished for good, and Pierce Brosnan was reportedly relieved rather than upset about the cancellation news at the time. After a successful screen test, he had quickly become the leading choice to replace Roger Moore as James Bond in the upcoming film The Living Daylights, complete with promotional photos already shot in classic gun-in-hand poses. Sounds like a dream outcome for any working actor, right? Not exactly how things actually played out for him in the end. Here is where it gets genuinely wild. News of Brosnan's potential Bond casting generated a massive wave of publicity that sent Remington Steele's summer rerun ratings soaring almost overnight. And with just days remaining on a 60-day network option window, NBC made the surprising last-minute decision to bring the show back for another season after all. Because Brosnan remained contractually bound to the series under that option, Bond producer Albert Broccoli refused to share his brand new leading man with weekly television and moved forward with casting Timothy Dalton instead. And no, that was absolutely not a coincidence Brosnan could have predicted in advance. And by his own account years later, it left him genuinely heartbroken at the exact time it happened to him. NBC reportedly tried to salvage the situation by offering to relocate production to Europe so Brosnan could juggle both projects at once. But Broccoli flatly rejected the compromise, unwilling to let his brand new cinematic spy compete for attention with a weekly television character. Number 3, a comeback season that practically nobody actually wanted in the end. After all the wild publicity surrounding the Almost Bond casting saga, NBC brought Remington Steele back for a 5th season, but the revival looked almost nothing like the show longtime fans remembered fondly from earlier years. Instead of a full run of weekly episodes, the network ordered just 6 installments total, structured as 3 separate movie-length stories, rather than the traditional weekly format viewers were used to seeing every week. Sounds like a reasonable creative compromise, right? Not exactly, according to most longtime viewers watching at the time. Here is where it gets a little bittersweet. By that point, the intense Bond-related publicity that had originally saved the show from cancellation had largely evaporated once Timothy Dalton was officially cast in the role instead of Brosnan, leaving the entire revival season feeling more like a contractual afterthought than a genuine creative continuation. Many fans have since described that final stretch of episodes as easily the weakest of the whole series, arguing the show probably should have simply ended on its earlier, far more satisfying note back in 1986. And what makes it even more ironic is that the very publicity storm that briefly resurrected the series is also largely credited with quietly draining away its remaining creative momentum for good afterward. The original cancellation itself had partly stemmed from tougher Saturday night competition against ABC's own detective drama, Spencer for Hire, which had been steadily chipping away at the ratings Remington Steele once enjoyed without much of a fight. Number 2, real life ended up imitating the show's own mystery father storyline in an eerie way. During production of an episode filmed on location in Ireland, Pierce Brosnan experienced a moment that felt almost scripted, except it was completely and genuinely real. The filming trip ultimately led to Brosnan meeting his own biological father, a man who had left the family when Brosnan was still an infant, for the very first time as a grown adult standing on set. Sounds like something ripped straight out of one of the show's own plot lines about hidden family connections, right? That is exactly the eerie part of this particular real-life story. Here is where it gets genuinely emotional. Brosnan later described expecting to encounter a tall, imposing figure, but instead met a man of medium build with pushed-back silver hair and a strong regional accent, a stranger who nonetheless shared his own blood and family history. He later expressed real regret that such a deeply personal reunion had unfolded under such public, work-related circumstances rather than somewhere far more private and quiet. And what makes it even stranger is just how closely this genuine real-life event mirrored the show's own fictional obsession with mysterious absent fathers and unresolved personal identity. For a series built almost entirely around a hero who never learns his own true origins, having its star quietly confront that exact same question in real life on the very same set felt less like a coincidence and more like the strangest possible piece of behind-the-scenes trivia the show ever produced. A genuinely emotional moment tucked inside what was otherwise just another working day of filming abroad. Number 1, the show that almost erased itself from Bond history, not once, but twice over. This one ties together nearly everything else on this entire list, and it is easily the wildest twist of the whole saga. Remington Steele was officially canceled in May of 1986, freeing Brosnan to accept the role of James Bond, only for a sudden ratings surge to bring the show roaring back from the dead and yank that hard-won opportunity away from him almost overnight. Sounds like enough drama for one entire lifetime, right? Not even close, honestly. Here is where it gets genuinely unbelievable. Co-star Louis Anderson, who guest-starred during the 4th season, later recalled just how heartbroken Brosnan truly was during that entire ordeal, describing him as devastated rather than angry about the situation he found himself trapped in. By the time NBC's revival option had finally run its course and the show was truly, permanently finished for good, the Bond producers had already moved forward with Timothy Dalton, meaning Brosnan's ongoing television commitment had cost him not one chance at Bond, but effectively delayed his entry into the franchise by nearly a full decade. He would not officially become James Bond until 1995's GoldenEye finally hit theaters and reintroduced him to a whole new generation. And somehow, that painful near miss ended up working out reasonably well for absolutely everyone involved in the end, giving audiences both a distinctive run of Timothy Dalton films and, eventually, one of the most celebrated and beloved Bond eras in the entire franchise's long history. Years later, promotional materials leaned directly into the connection with a tagline, noting that before he was James Bond, he was Remington Steele, a fitting bow on one of the strangest near misses in television history. And there you have it, 15 wild and genuinely surprising facts about Remington Steele. A show that turned out to be so much stranger behind the camera than the polished mystery it presented every week on screen. Which one shocked you the most? And which ones do you think we missed along the way? Was it the family reunion that felt ripped from the show's own scripts, or the twist that nearly rewrote James Bond history? Drop it in the comments below, because we always love hearing directly from you about these classic shows, and we genuinely read every single one of them. And if you want more deep dives into the classic detective series, iconic rising stars, and behind-the-scenes stories you grew up watching on television, make sure to subscribe and stick around right here with us. From tangled network contract battles to real-life reunions that felt like something out of the scripts themselves, shows like this one prove that the story behind the camera can end up being every bit as compelling as the one that actually made it to air. We have got plenty more where this came from, so stick around for the next countdown.